Sienna stole my pillow at 1 in the morning and held it against her ribs like evidence. She had kicked off her shoes by my bed, still wearing the black trousers from the sponsor mixer, her hair loosened from the neat twist everyone at Bellwether Studio admired. And she smiled at me with the unfair softness she saved for rooms with locked doors. "Come closer if you want it back," she whispered. I should have taken it as a joke. A normal best friend joke. A harmless roommate joke. But nothing between us had been harmless for months. In the studio, Sienna Calder belonged to bright rooms, donor smiles, and the circle of people who said her name as if it already had a plaque under it. In our apartment, she stole my pillow because she knew I could not sleep without it, made bitter mint tea when I revised too late, and kissed the inside of my wrist as if she had memorized every place where courage left me. I stood in the doorway with my toothbrush in my hand, trying to pretend the ache in me was annoyance. Earlier that day, she had passed my workbench with Rafe and Simone at her side and said nothing, not even when Rafe called my bridge model the scholarship miracle, in the tone rich people use when they want a charity to sound like admiration. 2 hours later, Sienna had texted me a photo of the same model from an angle only someone who had studied it carefully would notice, adding, "Your Western support is better than theirs." I stared at that message in the fabrication bay until the screen dimmed, hating that private tenderness could still feel like proof. Now she patted the mattress with my stolen pillow under one arm and looked almost nervous when I did not move. "You ignored me today," I said. Sienna's smile thinned. "I was trying not to make people wonder why I know so much about your work." "People wonder things. They recover." She sat up, the pillow slipping into her lap, and for a moment, the confident woman everyone chased after disappeared. My best friend looked young, frightened, and too beautiful for my self-control. "June, my father's foundation is everywhere in that building. Rafe reports gossip like it's a sport. Give me a little more time." Time had become the third person in our relationship. Time until the exhibition. Time until her father stopped watching. Time until she could explain that the girl who alphabetized spare blades and paid rent late only once was the person she came home to. I should have asked how many more times I would have to be invisible before she felt safe enough to call me real. Instead, I crossed the room because I loved her, and because being wanted by Sienna in the dark still made my better judgment quiet. She returned the pillow only after I sat on the edge of the bed. Her fingers covered mine. "I'm not ashamed of you," she said. I looked at our joined hands and wondered why the sentence hurt more than silence. "Then stop making me feel like something you hide before guests come over." She did not answer quickly enough. I lay beside her anyway, facing the ceiling, while she curled close, but not close enough to solve anything. I did not know yet that someone could mean every kiss, and still choose cowardice when it mattered most. The next morning, Sienna left 3 minutes before me so no one in the stairwell would see us arrive together. She had buttered my toast before she went and left a square of sandpaper beside my plate, with a note about the rough edge on my model. Care, with an escape route. That was her specialty. Bellwether Studio filled the lower floors of our old brick building, while 6 fellows lived above it like restless thoughts nobody could file away. By 9, Sienna was laughing near the window wall with visiting critics, posture immaculate, voice cool, and sure. I entered with my thermos and watched her public self close around her like glass. My bench was near the fabrication bay where the air smelled of basswood, scorched acrylic, and ambition. May Rivas leaned over the partition with safety goggles on top of her curls. "Hale, your bridge looks like it could survive a divorce," she said. "Is that an engineering compliment?" "From me?" "Deeply." May was in industrial design and treated every machine as if it were a temperamental horse. She noticed when people skipped meals, fixed broken clamps without announcing it, and spoke with a humor that did not ask anyone to shrink. When she handed me a spare blade and said my hand cuts were cleaner than Sienna's laser work, I laughed before I remembered Sienna was watching from across the room. Sienna's attention touched May, then me, then vanished. No one else would have read the tiny shift in her jaw as jealousy. I did, and for one pathetic second it comforted me. If she could be jealous, then she cared. If she cared, then waiting had a purpose. That was the kind of bargain I kept making with myself. Private evidence in exchange for public absence. During critique, Sienna praised my hinge system without naming how she'd seen me rebuild it on our kitchen table at midnight. Her words were smart and useful. They were also anonymous. By the end of the session, I understood that being admired by someone who would not acknowledge knowing you could feel lonelier than being ignored by everyone else. The public denial happened during the winter sponsor walkthrough, under lights that made everyone's work look more expensive than it was. I wore a black dress, I'd altered myself, and flats repaired with glue. Sienna wore dark green and seemed carved from the kind of confidence donors trusted. Before the doors opened, she found me in the paper archive and said, "You look beautiful," touching the loose hair near my ear because no one was there to witness it. I asked her not to say things in hidden rooms that she would swallow in public. She promised, "After tonight." I believed her because wanting to believe her had become a habit with muscle memory. An hour later, Professor Vale sent me across the hall with revised diagrams. Sienna stood with Rafe, Simone, 2 trustees, and her father, Alistair Calder, whose name was engraved near the lobby entrance. I approached because I had work to deliver, and because some tired, hopeful part of me thought she would at least take the folder like she knew my hand. "Sienna," I said. Her expression changed with devastating speed. The warmth vanished. The public smile arrived. "I'm sorry," she said clearly, while Rafe looked between us with amusement. "Do we know each other?" The folder felt suddenly heavy. Rafe gave a soft laugh. "Scholarship girl, right? The bridge one." Sienna saw my fingers tighten. She saw me understand. Her father turned slightly, and she chose him. Chose the trustees. Chose the version of her life where I remained safely unnamed. "You can leave it with Professor Vale," she said. My body did something merciful. It kept standing. I nodded, carried the folder to the projection wall, pinned the diagram straight, and answered a donor's question about disaster housing, as if my heart had not been folded into a shape too small to breathe inside. I did not make a scene. I did not cry. I simply felt something inside me step back and lock a door. That night, Sienna came home after midnight. She paused outside my room long enough for the hall light to draw a line under my door. "June," she whispered. I lay with my pillow under my cheek where it belonged, and pretended sleep had taken me before humiliation could. For the first time since we had kissed in the laundry room months earlier, I was grateful for the wall between our rooms. The next morning, her note waited by the kettle. I left it folded. A promise made after a public wound was not medicine. It was a receipt for damage already done. Avoiding Sienna required strategy because we shared an apartment, a studio, a refrigerator, and too many memories disguised as ordinary objects. I showered before her alarm, drank tea in the materials library, and worked in the basement fabrication lab until the night guard tapped the door with his ring. At home, I became polite. Politeness was colder than anger and easier to maintain. Sienna left apricot pastries by my drafting board, replaced my dull blades, and once stood in the kitchen holding 2 mugs with the devastated expression of someone discovering that care could arrive too late. I thanked her when necessary and gave nothing she could curl into hope. May found me in the stairwell after critique, sitting on the 3rd step with my coat on because I had meant to leave and forgotten where I could go that did not already contain myself. "You and Calder are fighting," she said, sitting 2 steps below me. "We're not anything enough to fight." "That sounds like a fight that got promoted." I rubbed dried glue from my thumb. She embarrassed me. May's face shifted. Not into gossip, but into anger on my behalf. "Sponsor night?" I looked at her. "You saw?" "Enough to want to weaponize hummus." I laughed once, against my will, and it saved me from crying. Sienna's first attempt to apologize happened in the corridor outside the map room. "I panicked," she said. I turned because the word was too convenient. "No, panicking is dropping a glass. You looked at them, looked at me, and chose the version of your life where I didn't exist." She flinched. "My father was there." "That explains the pressure. It doesn't erase the choice." Her mouth trembled, then steadied. "I'm sorry." I believed she was. That did not make her safe. "I also believe you would do it again if the room mattered enough," I said, and left before the grief in her eyes could make me responsible for comforting the person who had caused mine. The lunch invitation came on a Monday in the atrium cafeteria. a room designed so nobody could pretend privacy existed. I had presented my revised shelter module that morning, and for once, the visiting engineers asked difficult questions because they respected the work, not because they expected me to fail. May dropped into the chair across from me with soup and said, "Your bridge is becoming emotionally stable. I'm worried fame will change it. It has a stronger identity than most people here, including Rafe." I laughed, and the sound felt like proof that one public humiliation had not taken every easy thing from me. May slid half her crackers toward me. "There's a ceramics opening Friday on Lark Street. Weird teapots, bad wine, probably one man explaining clay to women who know more than he does. Come with me." I reached for a cracker and stopped. Her voice had changed only slightly, enough to make the question honest. "As a date?" "Yes, but only if that makes you curious instead of trapped." 2 tables away, metal struck porcelain. I did not look. I knew Sienna had heard. My first feeling was not triumph, but sadness, because some part of me had wanted Sienna to choose me before someone else proved I could be chosen. May waited with a patience I had not realized was rare. "I'd like that," I said. "I need to be honest, though. I'm not simple right now." May smiled. "Nobody worth asking out is simple. We can start with ugly teapots and no vows." Then Sienna stood. The atrium noticed in the small, predatory way public spaces notice women losing control. She walked to our table with her tray untouched. "June," she said, saying my name in daylight after denying it under chandeliers. My skin remembered before my heart could decide what to do. "Can we talk?" she asked. "I'm having lunch." "After. I have lab hours." Her hand tightened around the tray. "Tonight, then." I looked at May, who did not move, then back at Sienna. "You want to talk because May asked me out." Sienna's face went pale. "That isn't fair." "It's accurate." Rafe and Simone were watching from the far table. This was the moment she had trained herself to avoid. Witnesses, curiosity, the messy visible consequence of private choices. "Please," she said. The softness hurt because it belonged to our apartment. "You don't get to discover me because someone else saw me," I answered. Sienna absorbed it, then placed her tray at the empty end of our table and sat. "Then I'll wait until you're finished," she said. By evening, Bellwether had 3 new roomers, and for once none of them made me disappear. Sienna waited through the rest of lunch while May told me about a ceramicist who shaped bowls like architectural failures. She did not interrupt, which was either growth or agony performed with good posture. When I stood to return my tray, May rose too. "Friday still stands," she said. "If you change your mind, no dramatic explanation required." I told her I did not want to change my mind, and the sentence was for me as much as for her. Sienna followed me into the corridor, keeping 2 careful steps between us. Near the plaster cast outside the old lecture hall, she said, "My father controls the Calder recommendation. He thinks focus means never wanting anything he cannot display." I listened because new information mattered. I did not forgive, because context was not a key that automatically opened the door she had locked from the outside. "So you made me the thing he couldn't see," I said. "I didn't understand it that way then." "That's part of the problem." Sienna nodded, and for once she did not reach for me, did not try to turn remorse into touch. "I'm going out with May on Friday," I said. She swallowed. "Is that what you want?" "I want to remember what it feels like to be asked without being hidden inside the question." Sienna looked down. That line hurt her. It needed to. I set the boundaries before sympathy could dilute them. She would not enter my room, touch me, leave private notes, or use old domestic habits as apologies. If she wanted to speak to me, she could speak where her life could see her. "Are you asking me to move out?" she asked. "No, I'm reminding both of us that my name is on the lease too." The relief and shame on her face arrived together. "Okay," she said. "I can do that." For the first time, her agreement gave me space rather than asking me to fill hers. Friday's gallery smelled of clay dust, wet wool, and red wine cheap enough to make sincerity risky. May arrived in a rust-colored coat with a chipped enamel wrench pinned to the lapel and announced that the teapots were uglier than promised. The first one looked like a kettle losing an argument with gravity. I laughed hard enough to attract the disapproval of the donation table. May seemed pleased, not because she had won something, but because laughter had returned to me in public, and she had happened to be nearby when it did. She noticed the altered seam on my blue dress before complimenting the dress itself. "You fixed the waistline," she said. "That's clever." Most people would have called it pretty and stopped at the surface. May saw construction. We moved from piece to piece, talking about function, stubborn materials, and the moral failure of handles too small for human fingers. Under the awning of a closed bookstore afterward, she said, "I like you, June. Not as revenge against Calder, not as a lesson. I like your brain and your hands and the way you thank machines when they start working. I like you too," I said, because it was true enough to deserve daylight. "But I'm still tangled." May nodded. "Then we won't pretend otherwise. I won't be your hiding place from someone else's hiding." I carried that sentence home like a clean blade. Sienna sat at the kitchen table when I returned. Laptop open, no tea waiting, no pastry, no apology disguised as sweetness. She looked at my dress, at the cold on my cheeks, and asked, "Did you have a good time?" I said yes. Her fingers curled once against the table. "Good." Before going to my room, I paused. "Thank you for not waiting inside." Her smile was small and sad. My standards have fallen if that earns gratitude. "Mine too," I said. Truth, when spoken plainly, did not heal us. It gave the wound air. On Monday, the consequences began choosing rooms of their own. I was carrying basswood strips past the pinup room when I heard Rafe say something about Sienna. Slumming emotionally with the bridge girl, my body prepared for another old humiliation. Then Sienna's voice cut through the laughter. "Say her name." The room went quiet enough for the ventilation to become audible. "What?" Rafe said. "Her name is Juniper Hale. If you're going to be insulting, be accurate." Rafe tried to laugh it off. "Relax, Cal. Didn't know you'd gone full defender." "I lied at the sponsor walkthrough," Sienna said. The words stopped me at the doorway. "I knew June. I know her. I treated her badly because I was more afraid of what people like you would do with the truth than I was careful with her." Simone murmured a warning. Sienna ignored it. "She matters to me. She has for months, and I let you speak about her as if she were less than someone because it was convenient." Nobody clapped. Real courage usually made people uncomfortable before it impressed them. I walked away before she could see what that public correction did to me. Not because it meant nothing, but because it was not enough to erase the night she had denied me. At lunch, people looked at me with a new curiosity that made my skin itch. May sat beside me and produced a tiny clay whistle shaped like a bird. "The ceramicist gave me this. It sounds like an asthmatic ghost." It did, and I laughed until Professor Vale frowned from the faculty table. Across the atrium, Sienna sat alone near the window and let people whisper. That cost her more than a grand declaration would have. She knew how to be admired. She was only beginning to learn how to be seen without controlling the room. The spring installation forced us into the same project before either of us knew what forgiveness would look like. Professor Vale chose my modular shelter system as the lead piece and integrated Sienna's flood mapping model around it. "Try collaborating like adults," she said, handing us the brief. "Or fail in an educationally interesting way." Our first planning meeting took place in the old map room, where the windows were painted shut and every table had scars from decades of knives. Sienna arrived with folders, 2 coffees, and caution visible in the space around her. "I bought an extra," she said, placing one near me. "If you don't want it, I'll give it to Rafe and watch him pretend oat milk isn't an attack." I took it, because refusing kindness had started to feel like letting the past make all my decisions. We worked 4 hours without touching anything but paper. She listened when I disagreed. She credited my hinge system before mentioning her flood channels. She asked, "Can I mark this?" before writing on my draft. These were small things, technical things, not romantic things. That was why they mattered. They showed me respect when no one was watching closely enough to reward it. At sunset, Professor Vale reviewed our drawings and said, "Good. You're finally arguing like collaborators, instead of people trying to win a divorce." Sienna coughed. I stared at a contour line until my face cooled. After Vale left, Sienna said, "I miss knowing you easily." I looked up. "Easy is what broke us." She accepted that. The old Sienna would have tried to soften the sentence until it stopped accusing her. This Sienna let it stand. "Then I miss knowing you honestly," she said. I did not answer, but I kept the coffee cup on the table until long after it was empty. Pressure arrived wearing Sienna's family name. One morning I found her in the materials library with both hands braced on a shelf, pale with a fury so controlled it looked almost like calm. "My father wants me to separate my model from yours," she said. "He says the lead installation should not look like I'm lending prestige to a charity object." The phrase struck a familiar bruise. I folded my arms to keep from reaching for her. "What did you say?" "That if he wanted a daughter who confused cruelty with standards, he should have raised someone less observant. It would have been easier if I could dismiss her defiance as performance, but nobody was there except me, and the dust on journals no one had opened in years." "He threatened Copenhagen," she said. Everyone at Bellwether knew the Copenhagen climate residency. Sienna had wanted it since September. It was a golden door with her name practically etched into the handle. Sienna. I told him to keep the recommendation. "Don't make me the reason you lose things." Her gaze lifted to mine. "You are not the reason. You are the reason I noticed what I was already losing." During the trustees' review that afternoon, one of them called the installation Miss Calder's Social Initiative. Sienna interrupted with a professional smile sharp enough to cut wire. "It is Miss Hale's structural system. My work maps flood behavior around it. If you remove her name, the concept collapses, and so does my participation." Professor Vale's eyebrows rose with open approval. I stood beside the model, feeling the room adjust around a truth Sienna had once refused to let it hold. Afterward, I told her she did not have to do that so publicly. "I did, actually," she said. This time I believe she knew why. May and I went out twice more. Once to a student film night where we spent most of the screening whispering objections to the villain's impossible staircase, and once to a flea market where she bought a cracked drafting compass, because broken tools deserve second careers. I liked her more each time. That made honesty less optional. We sat near the river afterward with paper bags at our feet while wind lifted the edges of our coats. "You're going back to her," May said, not accusing, observing. "I don't know," I said. "That feels like a trap." May turned the cracked compass in her hands. "Because you think choosing her would make what she did acceptable?" I stared at the water. May had a talent for removing decorative fabric from a problem. "Maybe. Forgiveness isn't a receipt, June. You don't hand it over and prove the damage was worth it." She bumped her shoulder gently against mine. "But don't choose me because I'm safer to respect. That's not fair to either of us." We ended the romantic possibility without making it ugly. She kept my friendship, and I kept the lesson that being desired by someone else could open a door. But I still had to decide where I wanted to stand. When I came home, Sienna was building a cardboard floodplain on the living room floor. "May is my friend," I said. She was more than that for a little while. Or could have been. Sienna set down her knife carefully. "Thank you for telling me. Does it hurt?" "Yes," she said, "but not in a way that gives me rights." I laughed softly because the answer was annoyingly mature. Hope entered the room on quiet feet, and neither of us chased it. The founders' dinner took place under chandeliers that made the whole hall look like a museum exhibit about money. Professor Vale insisted I attend because the lead artist needed to learn which fork corresponded to survival. Sienna arrived separately in a black suit with a small silver drafting scale pin on her lapel. I recognized it immediately. I had given it to her months earlier as a joke after she corrected my measurements 3 times in one night. She had never worn it outside our apartment before. Seeing it there in the open made my anger and tenderness stand too close together. Alistair Calder approached me during the reception while I was explaining the hinge system to an alumna. "Miss Hale," he said, voice polished enough to hide the knife for half a sentence. "Your project has caused quite a stir." I answered carefully. He looked across the room at Sienna. "My daughter has always mistaken resistance for depth. Be careful not to confuse proximity to brilliance with possession of it." The alumna fled with the instincts of a donor who enjoyed art more than conflict. I opened my mouth, but Sienna appeared beside me before I could decide whether politeness deserved to die. She did not touch me. She did not speak over me. She looked at her father and said, "June possesses plenty of brilliance. That is why you're trying to make her feel temporary." People nearby began listening. Alistair said, "This is not the place." Sienna smiled, public and perfect, and finally honest. "It is exactly the place. Reputation is built in rooms like this. I'm choosing what mine becomes." Then, to the room, she corrected the record. I was the lead artist. She had treated me badly because fear had made her cruel. She was not asking for forgiveness, only refusing to let a lie keep serving her. It cost her something. I saw the cost land in her father's face. She stepped back afterward, not toward me for reward, but into the discomfort she had chosen. That mattered more than if she had pulled me under the chandelier and called it courage. After the dinner, Sienna asked if she could walk me home. The question held no assumption, so I said yes. Rain had rinsed the streets silver, and for several blocks we talked about practical things. The donor who misunderstood modularity, Professor Vale's terrifying approval, May stealing dinner rolls because she believed rich bread should be redistributed. Near a closed florist, Sienna stopped. "I need to say something before home makes me brave for the wrong reasons." She looked more nervous there than she had in the hall. "I loved you badly," she said. "I think I loved you truly, but I loved you badly. I wanted your softness after hard rooms, your mind, your awful little labels on toolboxes, the way you make places feel inhabited. But I didn't want the risk of being changed by wanting you, so I put the risk on you." My eyes burned. She continued without reaching for comfort. "When I stole your pillow, I thought I was being playful. I was also asking you to come closer inside my rules, where no one could see. I kept doing that in different forms." I looked at the dark florist window. "I wanted you to choose me, before choosing me, cost you something. I know. And now that it has cost you something, I don't want to be a prize you get for finally being decent." "You're not." "I still love you," I admitted, and hated how much relief crossed her face before she restrained it. "I still love you too." The words did not repair us. They opened a door to work. I gave her conditions. No secrecy, no turning patience into martyrdom, no deciding for both of us in the name of protection, no public performance replacing private accountability. She agreed to all of it. Then she held out her hand, palm up, letting me choose. When I placed my hand in hers, the city did not change. The ordinary weight of her fingers felt miraculous, precisely because it was not stolen. Trying again was not going back. That distinction saved us. We did not fall into the bed, the habits, the old shortcuts. Sienna did not steal my pillow or leave notes that expected tenderness in return. We worked, asked, listened, failed awkwardly, tried again. If someone in the studio asked whether we were together, Sienna looked at me before answering, and sometimes I said, "We're figuring it out," because visibility did not mean strangers owned the full map. May approved of our progress with threats. "If either of you becomes unbearable, I get June in the divorce." Sienna told her that seemed legally unsupported. May replied that she had a ghost whistle and no fear of court. The showcase filled the main hall with donors, faculty, students, and enough nervous energy to power the building if anyone had known how to wire it. Our installation unfolded from compressed panels into small, glowing shelter units, while Sienna's flood maps moved across the floor in projected blue lines. It was beautiful in a way that felt useful, the only kind of beauty I fully trusted. I gave the opening explanation with Professor Vale at my side, and Sienna standing with the team, not behind me, not in front of me, beside the work where collaborators belonged. My voice shook once, then steadied. I spoke about shelter that did not punish people for needing it, about structures light enough to move and strong enough to dignify survival. When applause came, it startled me. I found Sienna in the crowd crying openly, while May handed her a napkin with theatrical disgust. Later, Alistair Calder approached, looked at the installation, and said, "The work is stronger than I expected." It was not warmth. It was not transformation. It was the best a man like him could manage without injury. "Thank you," I said. Sienna stood beside me and did not add a sharper sentence, because she saw I did not need one. Her restraint was another kind of respect. When the hall emptied, Sienna and I sat inside one unfolded shelter with our shoes off, our backs against opposite walls, too tired to pretend elegance. Blue projection light moved over the floor like water learning boundaries. Sienna reached into her bag and pulled out a square wrapped in brown paper. "This is not an apology," she said. "It is a gift, which you may mock." Inside was a small pillow sewn from leftover fabric, printed with fragments of flood maps and structural lines. One corner was crooked enough to count as a personal philosophy. "Did you make this?" I asked. May helped. By helped, I mean she laughed until I threatened legal action. I turned the pillow over, delighted despite myself. "It's terrible." "I know. I love it." Sienna's face softened, but she did not move closer. The old Sienna would have turned the gift into a dare. This Sienna waited. I set the crooked pillow between us. "You understand I'm not coming closer just because you made a pillow. I was hoping you might come closer because you wanted to." That was the callback, remade properly. No theft, no command, no hidden room where affection could pretend it had no consequences. Just an invitation, open and waiting. I moved across the small shelter and sat beside her. She did not touch me until I leaned my head against her shoulder. Then her arm came around me with careful joy, and for a while we watched blue light move over our shoes. "I like this version better," I said. "The pillow?" "The asking." Her cheek rested lightly against my hair. "Me too." Outside the shelter, people dismantled displays and rolled cables. Inside it, something between us unfolded without collapsing. After the showcase, Professor Vale offered me a funded research extension and managed to look offended when I was surprised. Sienna accepted a climate design position across town instead of chasing the Copenhagen path her father had controlled. Choices arrived that were not shaped entirely by fear, which made them harder in a new way. For a week, our apartment filled with lists, rent numbers, studio access, deadlines, whether staying roommates while rebuilding a relationship was brave or idiotic. The old Sienna would have argued beautifully until I mistook surrender for agreement. The new Sienna made columns on paper and said, "I want to stay. Wanting that doesn't make it wise." We kept the apartment for 3 months and promised to reassess. Separate rooms stayed separate. Some nights she slept in mine after asking. Some nights I wanted my own space and woke to a kitchen note that said, "Your solitude remains respected, but toast has been made because bread is neutral." Love did not become perfect. Sienna still went polished and distant when stressed. I still disappeared into work before admitting hurt. But distance became a signal instead of a sentence. We asked sooner. We apologized without turning apologies into theater. The first time she called me her girlfriend in front of a delivery driver, I nearly dropped the dumplings. Sienna noticed. "Too much?" I shook my head. "No, just new." Her smile warmed slowly. "Good new or terrifying new?" "Both. That seems to be our specialty." May remained our friend and eventually started dating a printmaker named Sewell, who made her blush so badly I considered it public service to tease her. Simone became bearable. Rafe became quieter. Alistair did not become kind, but Sienna stopped renting her spine to him. On hard days, she asked to be held. On harder days, she asked to sit near me without talking. I learned that presence did not have to become rescue to matter. The weeks between the showcase offer and the end of our fellowship did not pass in a romantic montage. They passed in receipts, calendar conflicts, old reflexes, and the strange embarrassment of learning to be gentle with someone who had already seen the worst parts of your wanting. One Tuesday, Sienna came home from a meeting with her new firm and went silent in the polished way that used to mean I should guess what was wrong and soothe her without asking for anything back. I recognized the posture before I recognized my own response. My first instinct was to make tea and become useful. Instead, I stayed at the table with my grant forms and said, "I can see you're upset. I'm not going to chase the reason around the room." She froze near the sink, one hand on a glass. Then she set it down. They asked if I was prepared for people to assume I got hired because my father made calls. I waited. Did he? No. And even if he had, I would still have to live with what people think. The old Sienna would have sharpened herself against that humiliation until someone bled. This one leaned back against the counter and asked, "Can I sit with you while I feel disgusting for a while?" I moved the grant forms aside. Yes. She sat across from me, not touching, and we spent 20 minutes sorting receipts into piles while she breathed through the bruise to her pride. It was not dramatic. It did not look like healing from the outside. It was healing precisely because it gave neither of us a role to perform. Another evening, I failed instead. A donor who had ignored me all year sent a message asking for a meeting about my shelter system, copying Sienna, but not Professor Vale. The phrasing made it sound as if Sienna had arranged it for me. Shame, old and quick, turned my voice into a weapon. "Did you ask them to do this?" I demanded before she had even put down her bag. Sienna looked startled. "No. Because I don't need you fixing rooms behind me so people think I belong." Her face closed halfway, the public shield rising by habit. For a second, I thought she would retreat into injured dignity. Then she caught herself. "I did not arrange it," she said evenly. "But I understand why you are afraid I did." The absence of defense left me standing there with my unfairness in my hands. I wanted to keep arguing because apology required humility, and I was tired of being the less powerful person who still had to be reasonable. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry. That was old fear." Sienna nodded. Old fear is allowed to knock. It doesn't get to move in. I hated that she was using my own line from therapy-adjacent late-night internet reading. I also loved her for remembering it. Our apartment began to change before we moved a single box. The old geography of secrecy dissolved first. The kitchen stopped being the place where she touched my waist, only when the blinds were closed. The hallway stopped being the space where I listened for her footsteps and measured what kind of Sienna was coming home. My bedroom stopped being both sanctuary and evidence. We bought a second kettle because Sienna claimed mint contaminated every civilized beverage, and I claimed her black tea tasted like a legal threat. We argued over where to put the crooked pillow and finally settled it on the living room chair, where it looked like a small, badly sewn flag. Friends saw it when they visited. May pointed at it and said, "Ah, the famous emotional tax document." Sienna said, "Your disrespect for textile history is noted." I watched them bicker and realized the pillow no longer embarrassed me. It was not proof of a secret. It was proof that something once mishandled could be remade badly, visibly, and with enough honesty to become dear. Professor Vale gave me keys to the research annex on a Wednesday and warned me that the south window leaked during serious rain. "Do not romanticize water damage," she said. "You disaster people are prone to it." I spent the afternoon alone there, measuring tables, imagining models, trying to understand what it meant to have a future that did not arrive attached to Sienna's name. The annex was narrow and dusty, with a view of an alley where delivery bikes chained themselves like tired animals. I should have felt small. Instead, I felt alone in a way that belonged to me, clean and expansive. When Sienna came by after work, she stopped at the threshold and asked, "May I come in?" That question, in a room that was mine before it was ours, mattered. I said yes. She entered with 2 sandwiches and did not comment on the tears on my face until I said, "I think I'm happy." She smiled so carefully I wanted to touch her. That can be frightening. It is. Then we can be frightened respectfully. We ate on the floor among dust and measuring tape. She asked what I wanted the annex to become. For once, I answered without checking what answer would make me easier to love. The first time Sienna introduced me to someone from her new firm, she got nervous in an entirely new way. It happened outside a lecture on flood-responsive design, where half the audience wore black and the other half wore expressions of professional exhaustion. A senior designer approached her with the bright curiosity people used when evaluating whether a young hire was brilliant or merely expensive. "Sienna, introduce us," the woman said, looking at me. Sienna's hand brushed mine, then stopped, asking without words. I took it. She exhaled. "This is June Hale," she said. She's leading the adaptive shelter research at Bellwether. She is also my girlfriend." The word did not sound triumphant. It sounded practiced once in a mirror, and then trusted to survive daylight. The senior designer shook my hand and asked about the hinge system. She did not gasp, faint, or summon a scandal. Sienna laughed afterward in the stairwell, half relief, half disbelief. "You'd think I expected sirens." "Your social circle was not subtle." "No," she said, "but the world is apparently larger than my fear." That sentence stayed with me because it was true for both of us. May's friendship became one of the measures by which I judged whether I was losing myself again. She refused to let my relationship with Sienna become the only weather in my life. On Thursday mornings, she dragged me to the community workshop where she taught neighborhood teenagers how to use hand tools without sacrificing fingers. The first time I helped, a 17-year-old named Priya told me my emergency housing module looked like a transformer for sad architects, and I loved her immediately. May watched me demonstrate a folding joint and said later, "You look different when you teach." Worse? Less like you're asking permission to take up air. That was not about Sienna, which made it more important. My confidence had to grow roots in soil that did not depend on romance. By the end of the month, I was planning a youth workshop in the research annex. Sienna offered to help with materials, then added, "Only if you want me there as labor, not as atmosphere." I said I would like her there to cut cardboard and keep her opinions about everyone's measurement technique under control. She agreed with suspicious dignity. When the Calder Foundation officially withdrew its informal support from Sienna's residency applications, the news arrived by email on a sunny afternoon, which felt rude of the weather. Sienna read it twice at the kitchen table, then placed her phone face down. "I thought I was prepared," she said. "I'm not." I sat beside her, not across from her. "Do you want comfort or logistics?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Comfort first. Logistics in 10 minutes. I put my arms around her, and she folded carefully into me, as if still learning that kneading did not make her weak. She cried without elegance. When the 10 minutes passed, she laughed into my shoulder and said, "I regret requesting logistics with such specificity." "Too late. I have a spreadsheet." "Of course you do. We reviewed options. Independent residencies, firm mentorship, grant deadlines, Professor Vale's contacts. Losing her father's path hurt, but it also revealed all the doors she had not seen while staring at the one he guarded. That night, she did not ask me to promise everything would be fine. She asked me to remind her tomorrow that fear had lied before. I wrote it on a sticky note and placed it beside the kettle, where both of us would see it. Some people at Bellwether adjusted badly to our visibility. Not everyone was cruel. Some were merely clumsy. A first-year fellow asked if I had known dating a Calder would boost the narrative around my work. I stared at him until his ears turned red. Sienna, who stood nearby with a box of brackets, did not swoop in. She waited because she knew this was mine. My work had a narrative before Sienna had the courage to be in it. Honestly, I said. The fellow apologized so fast the words collided. Later, Sienna said, "I wanted to vaporize him." I could tell. I didn't. I noticed that too. The restraint was not passivity. It was trust. She no longer assumed protection meant taking the microphone from my hands. I no longer assumed accepting support meant becoming small. We were both learning the difference between being defended and being replaced. One Friday, Sienna and I fought about something stupid and therefore revealing, whether to throw away a cracked mug. It was mine, blue, chipped on the rim. Older than Bellwether, older than us. She said it was unsafe. I said I knew how to drink from my own mug. She said that was not a personality trait. I said her need to control ceramic risk was not love. The argument stopped there, both of us suddenly aware we had wandered onto deeper ground. Sienna set the mug down. "I am trying not to control things when I'm scared," she said. "Apparently the fear has selected dishware." I leaned against the counter. "I am trying not to treat every suggestion like a threat to my independence." We looked at the mug. It had become ridiculous and holy. Finally I said, "We can retire it to hold pencils." Sienna nodded gravely. A dignified second career. The fight ended not because one of us won, but because both of us recognized the old machinery before it crushed something tender. That felt like adulthood, which was annoying, but useful. My mother visited the city in late June, carrying a tote bag full of homemade sesame biscuits, and the quiet suspicion of anyone who had heard only fragments over the phone. She knew Sienna as my roommate and best friend, then as the person who had hurt me, then as the person I was trying to forgive without becoming foolish. I expected the meeting to be impossible. Instead, my mother sat at our kitchen table, accepted tea from Sienna, and asked, "Do you understand that my daughter becomes very calm when she is most hurt?" Sienna nearly dropped the spoon. "I'm learning." "Learn faster," my mother said. I covered my face. Sienna answered, "Yes, ma'am," with such solemn terror that my mother later told me she liked her more than expected. Before leaving, she pulled me into the hallway and touched my cheek. "You look like yourself," she said, "not like someone waiting to be chosen. Like someone choosing." I carried that blessing back into the apartment, where Sienna was washing cups as if my mother might grade the shine. Sienna did not meet my mother with charm alone. That mattered. She did not try to win her through compliments or stories about my talent. She answered hard questions. She admitted she had been cowardly. She said, without prompting, that she did not expect my family to trust her quickly because I had not healed quickly. My mother listened, then asked if she knew how to cook anything besides student pasta with ambition. Sienna said no, not reliably. By the end of the afternoon, they were arguing over lentil soup. I stood in the doorway and watched two parts of my life that had once seemed unable to share air occupy the same kitchen. The scene did not fix the past. It gave the future more witnesses. Later, after my mother left, Sienna leaned against the closed door and whispered, "I have faced trustees with less fear." She liked you. She threatened me with soup. That means she liked you. Sienna laughed and pulled me close only after I opened my arms. The research annex workshop became the first public thing that felt entirely mine. May brought the teenagers. Professor Vale pretended not to be delighted, and Sienna arrived in old jeans with a box of donated cutting mats from her firm. She introduced herself as June's assistant for the day, and when Priya asked if that meant she was less important, Sienna said, "Today? Yes. Correct hierarchy is essential to safe construction." I watched her teach a student how to score cardboard, patient and precise, and felt something in me settle. She was not shrinking herself for me. She was choosing a role appropriate to the room. At lunch, Priya asked if we were dating. I nearly inhaled a grape. Sienna looked at me. I nodded. "We are," she said. Priya considered this, then asked if relationship drama improved design quality. May answered from across the room, "Only if everyone survives it and learns documentation." The teenagers accepted this as wisdom. Perhaps it was. That day gave me a new understanding of being visible. I had once imagined openness as a single dramatic moment, a confession under lights, a hand held in front of enemies, a name corrected in a room of whispers. Those moments mattered. They broke the spell secrecy had cast, but openness also lived in duller places. It lived in Sienna writing both our names on a supply sign-out sheet. It lived in me mentioning her while talking to my mother without changing the subject. It lived in May teasing us in front of students and neither of us checking who heard. It lived in Sienna leaving my room in the morning with her hair messy and saying good morning to the neighbor on the stairs instead of ducking back inside like tenderness was contraband. Each small, ordinary act loosened a knot I had thought would stay forever. Still, trust returned unevenly. Some nights I woke from dreams of the sponsor hall, dreams where Sienna's blank public smile kept replacing her real face. The first time it happened after we had started trying again, I lay rigid beside her, furious at my own mind for dragging old pain into new sheets. Sienna stirred. "June?" I almost said nothing. Instead I said, "I dreamed you didn't know me." She did not apologize immediately, which would have made me responsible for forgiving her at 3 a.m. She turned on the small lamp and sat up. "What do you need?" I thought about it. "Tell me something true that isn't a promise." She nodded. "You're in your room. I am here because you asked me to stay. Tomorrow at 10 you have the hinge test with Priya's group. Your blue mug is full of pencils now because we negotiated with ceramics. I love you, and you're allowed to be angry while being loved. The dream loosened. I reached for her hand. Truth, I learned, could be a series of small accurate things. Sienna had her own bad nights. Sometimes she woke after conversations with her father and became distant with shame, as if needing comfort proved him right about attachment making her weak. Once, she stood by the window for so long that dawn began to pale the glass. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and stood beside her. Do you want me to ask? She shook her head, then changed it to a nod. He said I chose a smaller life. I looked at the street below. The delivery trucks, the damp awnings, the city beginning again with no concern for Sienna Calder's opinion. Do you think you did? Sienna was quiet for a long time. No. I think I chose a life where I can feel the size of things. I rested my shoulder against hers. She did not lean until she was ready. When she did, it was with her full weight, trusting me to say if it was too much. It was not too much. It was exactly the kind of weight love had to become. Offered, accepted, adjustable. The apartment began to empty by degrees. Books vanished into boxes. The studio scraps on our dining table became sorted piles. Sienna found old notes she had left me before everything broke, folded in drawers and tucked into sketchbooks. Tiny private proofs I had once cherished. She held one between two fingers, reading her own handwriting about a hinge angle and a pastry on the counter. Do you want to keep these? She asked. I looked at the pile. Some still warmed me, some hurt. All of them belonged to a version of us that had mistaken secrecy for intimacy. Not all, I said. We sat on the floor and sorted them together. Keep. Throw away. Maybe. Sienna did not argue when I discarded a note she remembered fondly. I did not mock her when she cried over one I kept. By the end, the maybe pile was small, the trash bag full, and the keep pile honest. Letting go, it turned out, could be collaborative too. On our last afternoon in the studio, Professor Hale summoned me to the main hall. I found my shelter model surrounded by first-year fellows taking measurements for storage. For a moment I panicked, thinking they would dismantle it wrong. Then I saw Sienna standing nearby, not directing, simply watching until I arrived. They asked me where the hinge pins go, she said. I told them I am not the authority. The first years looked at me expectantly. Once I might have glanced at Sienna before answering. This time I stepped forward and explained the system myself. Sienna listened with the attention she used to reserve for rooms where loving me was safe. When I finished, she said, See? Correct authority. Professor Hale from the balcony called down, Try not to flirt during archival procedure. May shouted from the fabrication bay, No promises from any of us. The hall laughed. I did too. Public joy felt strange at first, then natural. The day we carried the first boxes down to the lobby, Mrs. Alvarez from the second floor stopped us with a jar of pickled peppers, and the confidence of a woman who had watched every resident in the building make at least one bad decision. For the new place, she said, pressing the jar into my hands. Sienna thanked her with formal sincerity. Mrs. Alvarez looked at our joined hands, then at Sienna. You were very rude in the winter, I choked. Sienna went perfectly still, then said, Yes, I was. Mrs. Alvarez nodded, satisfied by the absence of excuses. You are less rude now. I'm trying. Good. Pretty girls should still have manners. Then she patted my cheek, told me not to let anyone with shiny shoes talk down to me, and went inside. In the stairwell, Sienna leaned against the wall and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. I thought your mother was frightening. The building has levels, I said. The encounter became one more proof that the world had noticed us all along in ways we had not controlled. Secrecy, I realized, had never truly protected Sienna. It had only made me face its cost alone. Our new apartment was not grand. It was a fifth-floor walk-up above a bakery that started working before dawn, with windows that stuck in humid weather and a living room barely large enough for both our desks. We chose it because the rent did not require miracles. The light was good, and the landlord did not blink when Sienna said, We're partners, while filling out the application. She said it casually, pen moving across paper, and I had to turn toward the window because my face betrayed me. Later on the sidewalk, she asked, "Was Partners all right?" I considered it. Yes. Too businesslike? A little. Beloved co-tenant? Absolutely not. Girlfriend with shared liability? Closer. We laughed under the striped bakery awning, and the laughter had no locked door around it. The lease carried both our names. I stared at that page for a long time that night. There were no donors there, no fathers, no friends who needed convincing. Just ink, responsibility, and a future neither of us could pretend had happened by accident. Packing revealed the archaeology of our relationship. Under the couch, we found a pencil I had accused Sienna of stealing in September. In a kitchen drawer, we found the receipt from the first groceries we bought together, when we were still strangers enough to split the cost of salt. Behind my bookshelf, Sienna found a hairpin she had lost the night she first kissed me in the laundry room. She held it up with a look that made the air change. "Do you want this memory kept?" she asked. Such a careful question. I took the pin from her palm. The memory still hurt. But not only. That kiss had been real. The harm had been real too. I was tired of histories that demanded one verdict. "We can keep it," I said. "Not as evidence." "As what?" I slipped it into the small box with the drafting scale pin, the ghost whistle May had given me as a joke, and the best of Sienna's old notes. "As a beginning that needed to grow up." Sienna nodded, eyes bright. "That seems fair." Fairness once had sounded like punishment. Now it sounded like room. On our final visit to Bellwether before the summer lockup, I went alone to the sponsor hall where Sienna had denied me. The chandeliers were off. Folding chairs leaned against the wall. Without people in it, the room looked almost ordinary, which offended me. I had expected the sight of my humiliation to remain dramatic out of respect. I stood where I had held the folder and remembered my own impossible calm. Then the memory changed its focus. I saw not only Sienna's cowardice, but my own survival. I had walked across that room with my work in my hands. I had pinned the diagrams straight. I had not vanished, though someone I loved had tried to make me disappear for her own safety. When Sienna found me there later, she stopped at the door. "Do you want me to leave?" "No." She entered slowly. I said, "This room used to be where you didn't know me." Her face tightened. "Yes." I looked at the blank wall. "Now it's where I know myself." She covered her mouth with one hand, not hiding, just overcome. I reached for her when I wanted to. That distinction still mattered. May threw us a moving dinner at the workshop because she said restaurants were where people paid too much to sit near strangers with better lighting. She ordered noodles, Sewell brought prints wrapped in brown paper, Priya made a card that depicted Sienna as a stern lighthouse, and me as a transformer for sad architects. Professor Vale appeared for exactly 22 minutes, delivered a bottle of wine, insulted everyone's posture, and left before anyone could thank her properly. During dinner, May tapped her chopsticks against her cup. "Speech," she announced. I groaned. Sienna looked terrified. May pointed at me. "June, you're more annoying now because you have self-esteem. Congratulations." She pointed at Sienna. "Sienna, you're less annoying now because you discovered accountability. Continue." Sewell applauded solemnly. Priya asked what accountability meant in a relationship. May answered, "It means saying sorry before the other person needs a PowerPoint." Sienna raised her cup. "To fewer PowerPoints." I clinked mine against hers. It was silly, warm, and public. A year earlier, I would have thought a grand confession was the opposite of hiding. That night taught me that sometimes the opposite of hiding was being teased by friends who expected you to stay. Before sleep on our last night in the old apartment, I stood in my empty bedroom and listened to the changed echo. The room where Sienna had stolen my pillow no longer looked like a secret chamber. It looked like a room that had held a younger version of me, with as much patience as walls could offer. There were pale squares on the floor where boxes had stood, a nail hole near the window, and one forgotten strip of masking tape stuck to the doorframe. Sienna appeared behind me and waited until I turned. "I won't miss the stairs," she said. You will when the bakery smell makes us hungry at 6 every morning. That is future Sienna's burden. She glanced at the bare mattress. Do you want tonight alone in here? The question moved through me gently. I thought of all the nights I had slept facing the wall because it was the only boundary I knew how to keep. No, I said, but I want the pillow. She fetched it without a joke, placed it in my hands, and let me decide what came next. The morning of the move, Sienna labeled one box personal/fragile, and I opened it to find not glass, but the parts of us she did not want the movers to handle. The crooked pillow, my kept notes, her drafting scale pin, the hairpin from the laundry room, the cracked mug full of pencils wrapped in a sweater. You packed our emotional evidence, I said, with archival care. You used my sweater. Community property. I started to laugh, then had to sit on the floor because the tenderness of it ambushed me. Sienna crouched across from me, careful not to crowd. Too much? She asked. I shook my head. No. I'm just realizing I don't want to throw the old story away. I want to stop living inside its worst scene. She looked down at the box, then back at me. Then we carry it differently. We sealed it together. On the tape, I wrote, keep, and underneath it, Sienna added, in plain sight. The movers were late, the elevator broke, and the bakery downstairs sent up 2 paper bags of day-old rolls. Because Mrs. Alvarez had apparently informed them, we were young women in need of carbohydrates and judgment. By noon, the apartment looked like a stage after the play had closed. Sienna stood in the center of the living room with dust on her sleeve and said, I keep expecting to feel only relief. What else do you feel? Grief. For the version of us that could have been easier if I'd been braver sooner. I put down the roll I was eating. I grieve her too sometimes, the June who waited. The Sienna who asked badly. They were trying with the tools they had. Sienna's eyes softened. Your compassion is inconvenient. So is your growth. We smiled at each other across the empty room. It struck me then that love did not require us to hate our former selves to outgrow them. It required us not to let them drive anymore. Near the end of June, on the last night before the fellowship apartments turned over to summer residents, Sienna and I packed the living room into boxes labeled with optimism and lies. Rain pressed silver threads down the windows. The crooked pillow sat on top of a box marked kitchen/maybe books. Sienna picked it up and inspected her own uneven stitching. This remains the worst object ever produced by anyone associated with Bellwether. It has emotional significance. So do tax documents, but I don't put them on beds. I took the pillow from her and held it to my chest. She watched me with the expression I had once only seen in darkness. Now the lamps were on, the curtains open, and our half-empty living room offered us no shadows to hide in. June, she said. Yes? She held out her hand, palm up, the same way she had under the florist awning. Come here because you want to. I crossed the room slowly, not because I needed time to decide, but because I liked watching her wait without fear turning into control. When I reached her, she did not pull. She let me set the pillow aside, let me choose the distance, let me place my hands at her waist, and kiss her in the middle of our unboxed life. Afterward, her forehead rested against mine. I'm glad you came closer, she whispered. I thought of the night she had stolen my pillow and called it invitation, of the rooms where I had mistaken being wanted for being valued, of the long road between secrecy and this ordinary light. I didn't come for the pillow, I said. Sienna laughed softly, and nothing about us had to hide. The pillow lay forgotten on the floor beside our packed boxes, finally unnecessary, while we stood together in the open space we had made.